visibly.
Your hair looks neat and tidy like mine.
Sure. I think you
Another
need a haircut.
Sunday, another creative
Sunday,
session.
completely refreshed. Preparing to cook my last ratatouille of the season, quite likely the last one of the season. And I'm going to roast a chicken today. That's my plan.
And my plan is to try and get my head around object-oriented programming in Python and go celebrate one of Davina's aunt's 80th birthdays.
Nice.
I'm very excited. We haven't got together as a family. We were talking about family and how interesting our families can be. I think I might be the mad uncle for my nephew. I might be that uncle.
Really? Why? Why do you say that?
Oh, because I'm
You're probably a cool uncle, no?
Well, cool / eccentric. I'm learning to skateboard.
Yeah, but isn't that? I mean, that might be strange, but not like to be. Not that they want to avoid you. No.
True. And I know what you mean by the relatives that you feel where, this feels really difficult and to sustain a conversation. I know what you mean by that. But that's families, right? Honestly, I know.
I was talking about that before we started streaming, so I thought we could move on to another topic or explain, but it doesn't matter. I think everybody gets the idea of the weird uncle. I'm a cool uncle, I like to think, for now anyway.
I will, yeah. But I was going to round it off by saying families are. When you speak to people about families, you discover all sorts of interesting things.
Sure.
You were. Oh yeah, so object oriented. Oh yeah, we were both saying. I feel like I'm working on studying, and I feel overwhelmed, but not drowning yet. I feel like I can just about touch the bottom of the swimming pool, and it's getting higher, and I'm like, how am I going to deal with this?
So that means you have a plan, a schedule, and you're managing your work, your life, your social life, and the studies that have come into it, and you're just about managing. Is that what you mean?
It means that I've now created a plan, and I can now see a way out. And I love what I'm doing. I just want to spend more time doing it. And it's starting to have other knock-on effects, which we mentioned last week, I think, where I'm trying to make sure that I get enough rest, and to get enough rest, I'm trying to eat properly. And then also, I'm still posting. I'm still writing posts.
That's great. I haven't been for 2 weeks. I was completely drowning in my syllabus preparation.
Yeah, but I'm squashing my posts. So I write them in, I push myself to write in 25 minutes. Whether it's any good, I don't know. But I'm writing. I definitely have things to say. And I'm writing it because part of me is being really stubborn. Like, I don't want to lose my streak.
I definitely need to look at yours, and I don't know if it's the same. I had come across somebody else who had recommended a whole methodology of post on the way to post on LinkedIn for extreme success, going from 0 to 1 million impressions in a month or whatever.
See all that. I've seen so many of that.
And surprisingly, somebody in my line of work, I was like, well, I thought we were more.
That's interesting. What do they say? How do they create?
I don't know. I've been meaning to look at it, and I've not had time.
And
so anyway, this is just the by point, because it's not really what we said we were going to talk about.
I know, but they work in strategy and stuff.
But I thought you had something that you'd read from another author about how to write the right kind of things on LinkedIn.
I had.
Right, as in to create impressions, blah blah blah.
Not so much, yeah, but I like clickbait. I like creating stuff that people genuinely think is worth reading. And the only reason, the thing the definition I like is that it's only clickbait when it doesn't fulfill what it set out to do. So if you're going to write
that's what you said last week.
Yeah, if you're going to write about gaming, and then you say this is a really find out all about this game or whatever the hell, and then your post is just promoting some other rubbish, then that's annoying. But if it's about gaming and does what it says on the tin, then it's going to be worth reading. That's the basic premise, and that's what I try and stick to when I'm writing. Funnily enough, similar to what I tell the students about, you're not writing a Nobel Prize winning book here. Just write. You're trying to put ideas across to the examiner. This is the game of exams, people. Write for the exams. And you said you got actually pupils who are and students who are like they're up for it. Did you say that?
The game of they're up for studying, you mean?
Yeah, they're interested in what you're explaining and talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I spent.
Depend. I also this week started the teaching the fourth year students at the other school where I'm used to teach.
So now you got two sets of students to notice what they're like.
I have 4 right now.
But 2 different institutions, and they're going to be
2 different
different.
institutions, and then I have 3 classes in this new one. And big ones. I mean, there's 32, they packed them in. There's like a lot of last year I had one group of 20, I think, or 25 for the same course, and this year there's 3.
Do you notice any difference in the students between institutions?
Well, yes. Okay, so that's one difference is right now these are 4th year students, whereas at the American University they're graduates, so 5th year students.
Okay.
And there are a few people who went out to work and then came back to do a graduate degree. So there's a difference in terms of motivation and age also. Or a couple of others that have done a gap year between their undergrad and their graduate degree or things like that. So and it's a very different type of environment. By that I mean the vibe of, so it's going to change because I'm changing it, because I'm teaching anyway. But the stated idea of ISCOM is to be a practice school. You're learning to be on the job, and you're going to go do internships, and the courses are just kind of idea of like learning some theory, but it's learning the doing of how to work in communications and marketing. It's
very similar to what I'm doing. It sounds very similar.
Perhaps. I mean, it's meant to be more of a business school, vocation-ish type thing, whereas the American University is meant to be a liberal arts college type experience. So even just by the sake of rather than being in a cohort of one class, all the students are together, which is the French system. These students are choosing their own class. So all the students I have in the class are not doing the same thing. They're not following the same courses. And they also belong to 2 different degrees. My course happens to be split across 2 different diplomas.
I think that's more of a US thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Very US. So, but just even before anybody says anything, that changes the context.
It does. Yeah.
How? I don't exactly know. It's difficult I think it changes the context to be, which I think is what they want or why it's that way, to be somewhat, I say somewhat, I think that's the intention. I'm not sure that's actually what it does, to be more responsible, I suppose, on the part of the students.
Because they're choosing their path.
They're choosing their path, whereas the other school is kind of like, it looks very much like high school. It's a classroom with the same class, with the same teacher. And that's part of the promise and part of the reason why a lot of kids go to these types of business schools is they have the same kind of framework to support them, whereas kids who go to university do not. They're let go in the wild, and they're just like pushed off a cliff, and figure out who manages to fly or not. Most people don't. Most students don't make it. They just and the French university system is harsh. And if you don't know the codes, you don't know what's requested.
You've mentioned this before.
You're not going to be taught unless somebody else teaches you, a tutor or a parent. I've said this before.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I find that.
Now, this is, of course, the undergrads, the first-year students. This is not what I have. And then within the communication school here, there's also a third group, which is interesting, which there's a new program with the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York, which is a university in New York, basically. Which is not necessarily about fashion, but it's called fashion, so you think it's about fashion. Anyway, it's kind of weird. It was created in the 1950s or 60s, and when somebody said, "Oh, we need an MIT, but for fashion and the textile industry." But really, little by little, it became just another university, first a community college and then a normal college that offers a lot of courses around design. It was meant to be vocational, everything to do with fashion, textile, design, but actually it seems to be more of a normal but kind of dedicated towards design university. Anyhow, all that to say, they now have a partnership with a school where I teach ISCOM. And the students who are participating in this joint program, the French students went to study in the US last year. And now the same class who have studied together in the US are now studying in France. So I have
that sounds
which
cool.
is super interesting because I feel the French students have come back with a bit more, I think, confidence to be able to participate in class. Not necessarily knowledge, but a bit more ease to participate in class. I don't know about the knowledge. I'm not sure about that. But they're very nice and they're participating. So what did you study last year? And they were like, "Oh, what did we study last year?" Like, okay, great.
But you said that.
Oh yeah, psychology. We did social psychology. Oh yeah. There was a class on social psychology. Okay, great. What's one thing you learned?
Okay, that's a universal kind of
of course. So it's also
funny
to say that they're not massively different. They're still kind of just
the universal. That's like, what did you learn? Don't know. but that's very different from
they did answer. Somebody
answered
something about Milgram. They did. They
of
learned
course.
About Milgram's
okay, the classic study. But you said that the American uni is much more discussion based and people want to say what they think.
Supposedly, but that's kind of what I'm meant to be doing at ISCOM already. And in my experiences, it's not massively different, but it depends. I'm trying to figure out what to engage in. It's interesting because the semiotics is should I talk about semiotics? Is that what you want?
Yeah, but before you do, the really interesting thing you said before we went live is in teaching, even lecturing, you're there by yourself with a group of people. Some of the most interesting things in teaching have been when I've watched other people teach or other people come and watch me and then they tell me what they thought. So you said that you saw the guy that you're taking over from. The guy
that I'm taking over from came and taught a class on Thursday.
And you got to watch?
Yeah, I was watching. It was part of the class. It was really interesting.
That's so useful. So useful.
And clearly, he has a lot of experience. So it was great to see him. Very, very comfortable and, of course, makes sense. And very, I don't know, for lack of a better word, university professor.
Was he wearing a jacket with elbow patches?
No, he had a shirt on. It's a bit warm still. No, by that I mean it was just, and that's the way he talks. He just quotes authors every other sentence.
Oh wow!
Quotes or references thinkers and authors every other sentence, but half going in a tangent. It's a tangential thought. It's like, this psychologist Jacques Lacan said this, but we're not going to study that right now. It's got nothing to do. We're going to come back to the point. I'm like, all right. I think this is by way of meaning that it was really good to see him teach, and really good to see. Also, I'm like, I can't teach that way. It's not me. I can't be him. It's not possible. I can't be him. I can't give the same references. And his references seem important to him, which is fair. I would love to acquire more of his knowledge and the readings from his previous syllabus. And it's been difficult for me the past 3 weeks trying to figure out how much would I include from his syllabus, transitioning kind of thing. And the draw was to want to throw everything out of the window and do my own, which I mostly did. Because that's what the rest of the school directors and provosts said, just teach what you know. We're hiring you can't be. But
he comes from this academic kind of like, oh my, theoretical, I know loads of stuff background.
Well, and it's also interesting to
and you're from this practical, real world
Yeah, I'm very on the practical real world side of things. But what's been tough, and I guess we'll discuss it again and adjust, was for me to try to figure out what is the right balance and what is meant when it's said like this is graduate level, so it's master's level, meant to be a high enough level, and it's meant to be a theory thinky, academic research context, environment, establishment, whatever you want to say. So it needs to be of a certain level. But I also would talk about other things, and or at least my impression out of a couple of conversations in the past with that professor was that he wanted to both this, like really, a high level or rigorous level of authors, references, readings, etc., but also saying that the students don't read, and they don't necessarily care. And that I was like, oh, how about this? And he's like, well, it needs to be really, and then my impression out of a couple of conversations was if I offered or suggested a particular offer, he would either say that this is too easy and it's a commercial book, it's not really worth studying, or that he would say, no, this is way above their heads, they're not going to understand. So I'm like, so what's the right, what's acceptable?
It's difficult. You kind of, I
and
have
the things I know,
struggles.
he doesn't know.
The same struggles. Yeah,
we don't have the same references.
Yeah.
And I realize that some of the things he's rating and talking about, I'm like, I don't think I rate that.
That's a good
I don't think that's worthwhile.
I think that's a good thing. You're the new,
I'm the new kid in town.
Well, yeah, but you're also, you have to let the past die. You've got to move on. And for something like semiotics and
this is not semiotics. He's an expert in semiotics. This is not for semiotics I'm talking about, because he's an expert. I'm not. I'm moving on to other things.
Okay.
So I did semiotics at the beginning, and I even wonder if I don't regret, because he started this way, and that is in the learning objectives. So I kind of have to reference it, but it's not my thing. Or I do it like everybody else does, which is without the semiotic. We do semiotics, which is analyzing science. Anyway, let me just give you the brief thing on semiotics.
Science and meaning and all that.
Exactly. Yeah. So semiotics is the study of signs and meaning, the meaning derived from them. There's a lot of argument, and it seems like more than any other academic environments, but maybe it's the same as every other, of debate and contradictions as to what exactly this study is. And some of them say, a lot of people seem to say, and I kind of think I agree with them, without really knowing all that much more, instinctively agree that it's not a real discipline, because it's not science, or at least it's a discipline in the context of another discipline. Because
which would be, what's in the context of what? Which one?
Linguistics, anthropology, communication. Because the way that there's not one universal way, and there's a lot of theorists that keep trying to have universal ways to analyze signs, but then the sign itself, a sign is anything that derives and gives meaning. But there's a lot of debate.
I don't see how you can separate that from culture and anthropology and all of that.
But you can only apply it to certain things. You can't study it in itself, because then where's the meaning? And the signs are, the studying and the interpretation of the sign are part of it. And there's a bunch of different meanings depending where you are, what constitutes a sign or not. And as soon as you start defining what constitutes a sign, you also, I think I'm going to have a hard time saying this one. And I can send you the web page I found, which is another. So he was using an old set of web pages, and I took a while to redo them with modern examples, which is quite interesting and gives the basic idea. And the basic idea I'll describe. The basic idea is, apparently all basic tutorials of semiotics start with the famous Magritte's painting of a pipe and says, "Ceci n'est pas une pipe." This is not a pipe. Have you seen this? Should I share my screen?
Is this why you posted that picture of a pipe with Mario coming out of it?
Yeah.
Ah, okay. Okay. There's many levels to that post. Yes. Because of course it's Mario and a pipe, but it's not a pipe. And
and I have the t-shirt also. That's the other thing.
Oh, See,
But in the first
wow.
place, the semiotic analysis is the semiotic idea is that we see signs and then automatically interpret them as the thing itself.
Okay. Yeah, we
But
think
that is not a pipe, it's an
that's
image of a pipe. And
yeah.
even more so, it's an image of it's a digital image of a photo, of a painting of a pipe. And it's
Yeah,
not a
yeah,
pipe.
yeah, yeah. It's an abstraction. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the
Now, of
words.
course, they don't
Yeah.
mention the fact that there's also a double entendre, which is very sexual in nature
Of
and
course.
raunchy of Magritte's, because he was part of a surrealist movement and he was a provocateur.
Uh-huh.
And pipe in French is a fellatio.
Oh, wow.
What's funny when you're studying this stuff of very serious semioticians that are like looking at analyzing and saying this is not actually a pipe, it's an image of a pipe, and you're like, well, yes, but there's also clearly another interpretation to this thing as to why there's this painting there, because the pipe, the object, is not a fellatio.
Yeah.
And also, interestingly, I came across while I was doing my research, some guy wrote a whole proposition of like trying to justify why he thought that was the case, even though to all French people is super obvious.
Yeah.
But it seems like that piece of jargon, calling that a pipe, was very recent. So it's like the jargon appeared a year before the painting was made. So it was of the time,
Right.
in 1927, 1928. So which is super interesting. So anyway, so the idea of the semiotics to begin with is to explain, well, we see a pipe and we interpret it immediately, but actually it's an image of one. And right now, there's also where it gets complicated and where it gets very quickly confusing. And I've not even studied all of the theories, only just like the basics as much as the students. Any word I say is also a sign, audio sign.
Yes.
We look at visual, we've been looking at visual signs.
Yeah.
Anything that derives meaning is a sign.
Yeah.
So what constitutes a sign is very difficult, because it just, as soon as you start interpreting the meaning, then the meaning is only interpreted in context of something else, which is the language, the culture, the people, etc. So that's why students of semiotics tend to have some other specialty along with it.
Okay, and I can totally see how
of human, and then there's a bunch of people that apparently contest that it's a human science at all, because you can't define it as such. It can't be studied on its own, and it doesn't have firm rules as to what it actually is. It's applied to other things.
It makes perfect sense to study this within the context of branding and marketing and all of that.
And the idea of the basics that we studied are the basic vocabulary of, I think, coming from one of the founders called Ferdinand de Saussure, who was a Swiss linguist in the early 20th century, I believe. So he's the one who formalized this idea of a sign. And in his world, and that's what I taught to students, the sign is made up of two elements, the signified and the signifier. Okay, so, and that's where you start looking at this, it gets confusing very fast, because it could be multiple of those things. But the signified is the thing itself, and the signifier is what it means.
You mean like the picture of the pipe?
I mean, like if you look at a picture of a rose,
it
is meant to signify the flower, a rose. But it means wait, let me go back to my slides before I get confused, actually.
So it could mean
rose. What does the rose mean?
Many things. What does the rose mean? Well, it's okay. There's already layers and layers.
And this is the first one. And I'm not comfortable enough to see. I thought I was, but I'm not comfortable enough to go on about it without checking. You see?
But that's part of the thing about teaching, and part of the thing about learning, and part of the thing about the exploring, and like it's never ending. And I heard two phrases in teaching. One was, or two things. One is, as long as you're a chapter ahead, it's fine.
Yeah.
using
except that
textbook.
that's the big challenge for me was to prepare the whole syllabus.
Yeah.
And
I
I did not have any time for. It was really stressful, and I spent a lot of time on it that I should have been doing other things, because I'm not a full-time teacher, but I did it anyway. Super interesting, don't get me wrong.
Oh yeah.
But I finalized it. Now I want to add more things, but I have the main
Of course.
stroke. I have it.
As long as you've got a skeleton. So that's one thing teachers say.
So I feel a lot more comfortable now that I still have a lot of work to do, but I know what I'm teaching. I was really stressed out as to like, what is it I'm actually teaching here?
Yep. And then the other phrase I heard was doorknob lessons. I was like, what is that?
So which one?
A doorknob lesson?
Doorknob blessing? Okay.
A doorknob lesson.
Oh, okay. What is that?
So a doorknob lesson is where you, as you put in your hand to open the door to go in the class, you think of the lesson.
Okay. Sure.
And what I found, and I've got the experience to be able to do it, is that I'll plan something and then some other circumstance or some other thing will get in the way or mean that I get derailed straight away.
Yeah.
So I tend to throw it out the window. And that it's happened so many times. I just accept it as normal. It's part of what it is to be a teacher. So it's but and I said this last week, having a foundation of knowledge makes the biggest difference, because you know what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let me.
So this was the rose. It's not a rose. It's a picture of a rose. It's a signifier of the rose.
Okay, so the idea here first. Let me share my screen.
I'm assuming you can.
Yeah, I'm assuming that you're ready.
Okay.
Can you see? So this is what we're talking about, right?
This is not a pipe. Yes. Okay. I have seen this.
So also
the sheer number of tabs is it's just disturbing me. I can't handle it.
It's disturbing my girlfriend. So similarly, this. So and I think so. The tutorial I saw, I think went a little bit too fast on this point. So you see this and you say, what is this?
It's like two people and a sunset, holding hands in a sunset.
Yeah, but what is it?
True love.
Yeah, exactly.
A heart.
Right. So, and even just describing what's on the image, you went a step too fast to the basic of semiotics, but it's good. It's very good, because most people will say that just it's love. Now, at the same time, it is not.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. So the idea here is to get that we have automatic interpretations that are intuitive and go extremely fast, but there's actually a lot going on there.
Yeah.
And to begin with, this is actually not that. In the same way that this is not a pipe, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so in Saussure version of semiotic, we have the sign, as I just said, right?
Yep.
Wait, it's loading. All right. So and Umberto Eco, who was a writer, linguistic, and a semiotician, he used to say a sign
was he really?
Can be used to tell a lie. Yeah.
I've got his book. Whatchamacallit, The Name of the Rose. I haven't read it, but
that's really good.
I keep hearing it's good.
Okay, so we have the sign, and now it's split in two things. Any material that signifies, the signifier.
Yeah.
Right? So including the words I say out of my mouth and what you see there on the screen. That's the context of support for the meaning. That's the signifier. And the signified is what the meaning refers to. Okay? So we have the rose, and the signifier is a rose, and the signified is that flower. Now, what also gets confusing is the rose itself is a sign too.
You mean the word rose?
The word rose or there on the screen is actually also a sign.
Yeah.
But to be able to, it's an abstraction to be able to explain those things.
Yeah.
But none of those are the actual flower it refers to, but they also are. But that's going a step too far. That's also why there's other but that's just to say this is the first tradition of semiotics.
Okay.
And there's other traditions where they have a triad, which there's three things, but it doesn't change the fact that it's quickly very confusing, because you're like, wait a minute, this is a sign and this is a sign. Well, let's just say, for the sake of argument, that one is a signifier and the other one is a signified. but it goes very fast. Anyhow, so, and then we have the beginning of the vocabulary, which is denotation. Denotation is, as you said, when the image that we looked at earlier is two people holding hands. So you describe what is seen rather than the meaning attached to them. Okay.
Yeah.
So if this is on the simple side, you have, okay, while still remembering that these are not the things, they're only signs of the things. They also, we have a rose, and the rose could signify love or passion.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And we start having multiple signifiers and signified, so they're layered.
Yep.
And then you can keep layering on other types of meaning, just keeping the same idea. But the rose is also the bachelor, which is also related to love, and Valentine's Day is also related to love. But there could be other images, and you go in other directions of meanings with thorns, the War of the Roses, cultural references, history, etc. So it's just to say that that's just the beginning of the rabbit hole. But the beginning, the idea is there's a signifier and a signified. Okay, and then where did I go? I just talked about some basic vocabulary to describe images, and you start, and then the teacher came to talk about his methodology to describe to analyze an image, where you start with, and the images in this case for the students are ads, right? They're brand messages. You start with denotation, which is exactly describing what is in there, and we're not used to this, where the students are not practiced, and generally people are not practiced in really stopping to actually look at what is there, which I think you're more familiar with, and some people are practiced and trained in. Does that make sense what I'm saying so far?
It makes complete sense. It's just that I usually, what's funny is that when I talk with students and stuff, I literally say what's there as partly as a joke, and partly as a way of focusing on reality. In teaching psychology, we talk about this whole abstraction thought processes, and the sensory input that we get is not what we see, and what we get from our senses is not reality.
Yes,
that's the kind of conversation that I go. And then when I explain this, or when we talk about this, you can see the students going, and they're younger, so they're like 16, 17, they're really going, they're grappling with it, and then they're confused, and then they start going, but what if, and does that mean? And I'm like, yeah, we don't see reality as it is. We see it.
Yeah, and that's not even what I meant. But you're right. Also.
I know.
I might go there. And
the maybe we do. Maybe we are more trained in like, these are the facts. What I see are two people holding hands in the sun.
Yeah, that's the first answer. But also, you suspected there was maybe some kind of.
Oh yeah, I knew there was. It's a trap. I knew.
But the reality is, like, this is love, or some kind, or something like that. When you see it.
Yeah.
What I underline to the students is that, to begin with, is also very interesting that we know that. We all know that. The group of people are all different cultures.
True.
We know that.
Very true. Yes, we do.
And we don't have to think about it.
That is, yes.
And it is. Before saying that it is not, I think it's important to say that this is what we see. We all agree. This is how we communicate the idea of love. One of the ways that we communicate the idea of love is, and we don't need to think about it.
Yeah.
Which is also why, and there's a lot more to explore than the basic idea, but brands, you only have a fraction of a section to communicate something. So you use widely known cliches, stereotypes, etc. So anyway, back to the analysis. That's what we did with the other teacher on Thursday, is denotation, fully describe what's going on, including what we don't think about. So the frame, the type, the fonts, the messages, etc. And where you go first might be, well, oh, this person is doing that. And in this particular case, he was commenting on an ad he had with two models for a Louis Vuitton ad. And one of the students says, oh, it looks like she's fighting the other one. No, fighting is not a literal description of what you see in the image.
Yeah.
So fighting gets us to the second stage, which is connotation.
Yeah.
The meaning derived from what is on the image.
Wow.
It looks like they're fighting is already connotation. It's an interpretation of what is there.
Yep.
So you split out the two of them. Now it's an artificial way to split things out. But so connotation, all the interpretation of different meanings you can see in the image. And then there's organization into parts. How could you organize the image in different parts based on what's there? And you could do, there's multiple interpretations for any image. There's no right answer, but there's a request to, how can you organize this? Are there 3 columns? Is it 4 square? Based on what is in the image, how is this image split? Or how can you split it? And then you started talking about juxtapositions and oppositions. Are there concepts and ideas that are juxtaposed or opposed present in this image?
The you know what you said about brands having a split second to communicate something. There's in the UK at the moment, there's a series of Guinness poster ads, and they're striking.
Yeah,
they're like action oriented, like movement is happening, but you know it's Guinness. So on the first look, like if you just glance at it, it's like you see the black and the white, like it's a Guinness.
Well,
then yeah, I don't know if you've seen these, but
no, I've not seen this, but I have another Guinness ad that I was just going to put on.
The one that strikes me is it's a wave crashing against something, and it outlines what looks like a Guinness. It's So
this is actually a student.
That's new.
That's from last year during the coronation. For the coronation, I believe it was a student project that won awards, and then it was spread out through the internet.
Very good,
but
it's not actually their official thing.
Yeah, but well, at some point that's another interesting idea, because the student said, "Oh, I just looked it up online, and this is not an actual official ad." But I'm like, "Well, what does it matter?"
It's still the brand.
It was a student that won awards, and it's been traveling all around the world as a Guinness ad.
Yeah,
and it's an image that we can analyze.
Free advertising for Guinness.
Have you heard of at that point? Is it or is it not? Because it respects everything about the brand. And then we started. We kept looking at more terms. So that the vocabulary of semiotics, for example, a metaphor. So we talked about paradigms. We talked about metaphors. We talked about metonymies. So metonymy is a type of connotation where one side is substituted for another that is closely associated, such as using a crown to represent royalty. And then we have a synecdoche. It's a type of connotation in which a part is used to represent the whole.
That's clever.
So here, the part that is used is the yellow curve, which is actually, everybody, we know that it is the part of the McDonald's logo.
Someone did this exact thing, the Rick roll thing.
Yeah.
So some ex pupils were constantly Rick rolling me, constantly.
Yeah.
And I got a picture from one once, just like that McDonald's ad of Rick Astley's shoe, and I knew what it was. I don't know how I knew.
That's fantastic.
I knew.
It's like playing the game.
Yeah, it did. It did have some text about, like, you can't. It's impossible to Rick roll. So there was some sign that, it was perfectly set up, just like that ad. I couldn't believe it.
And so another type of vocabulary is signs in the analysis can have paradigmatic relations, where signs could derive their meaning with association with other signs.
Yeah.
So here again, and this is just another way, the paradigmatic relation.
How would you say that in French? Because I think in English I would say paradigmatic.
Paradigmatic? Maybe that's the right word.
I don't know. I'm wondering.
And then the other one is symptomatic relations, where they get their meaning from sequential order. So here you read, and in Marcos, we read from left to right, top to bottom. And here the meaning is derived from reading the 3 of those things together. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. One after the other. There's a sequence of events that make up a language. Then we talked about, I mentioned stories and narratives and narrative structures. I didn't explain the whole thing. I just mentioned that they existed. We might circle back to them. Actually, now I'm thinking this, and I'm like, oh, I wanted to have a class on that and didn't fit it in. Maybe I'll talk about it when I have to figure out when I can talk about that. Because every class you need to have a topic and have readings that are associated with them.
Of course.
Then a myth, combination of paradigms and systems that make up an oft-told story with elaborate cultural associations.
God, there's so much going on. Just listening to you and then looking at that image, there's so much going on in that image.
Yeah. So
much.
All that together is we have the sign, the signifier, the signified, denotation, connotation, stories and myths, codes. Wait, there's another one. Is that it? No, that's it. Then we have, what else is there? Codes. All of that together are combinations of semiotic systems that function as general maps of meaning. So,
what is that a picture from? Is that just a random picture you've had? Or is that from something?
It's not. It's from something. It's the PNG Thank You Mom Olympics sponsorship campaign.
Okay.
This specific one was from Rio 2016, I believe. And then we have ideologies that are codes to reinforce structures of power.
That's very true.
Sorry.
Oh, that's very good.
Yeah.
It's obvious.
Yeah. So that's what we were doing. And I spent 2 weeks doing my syllabus.
I do think knowing where you're going and where you want to end up as a teacher is probably more important than the individual lesson. The bigger kind of set of sequence is more important. And
so all this stuff, all this vocabulary in the language, I'm not familiar with. What I am familiar with, and that's also what I told the students as to like why this stuff is important, is the better they are at looking around them and analyzing and understanding what is presented at them. And the better they are at describing, analyzing, and speaking out as to what they see in images, the better communication professionals they can be, or professionals overall. Like whatever job you end up doing will be useful. Now you don't have to throw the vocabulary at anybody. But if you just describe what is there, this is what's going on in this image and this is what it means, everybody understands that. And it is very valuable in a professional communications environment to be able to say what you see and what it means.
That's what you bring. That's what you're bringing to the students. You're bringing that link back to, and that's probably why that's what you're there for. You're bringing that link to, this is all great in theory, but when you're sitting in a meeting or when you're writing a brief or when you're doing the things that people who work in strategy do, this is why it's useful. That bridge, I think, is so useful for young people, especially at school, especially in a learning context. It's so useful, and it gets lost. So much of the time it gets lost. And I get irritated sometimes when I hear young people say, or people say, like, what's the point of doing maths? Because I'm not going to use it. Well, okay, it's easy to say that, but there's levels to it. Yes, the individual concepts to do with quadratics you might not use, but, and we've talked about this at length, doing hard stuff and getting used to doing difficult things and grappling with things will help you in whatever professional context you're in.
Yeah.
And that link that I keep emphasizing to the people I teach gets lost because I think it needs constant reinforcing.
Yeah. So, and then I added a lot of readings in my syllabus, and I'm going to, from Monday, tomorrow, I'm now into a lot more familiar territory. I'm teaching what I know. I've chosen stuff that I know. So, and I'm mixing in between scholarly marketing research articles, movies, books, and the books I have no logo.
Yes,
and it's interesting because I talked with the other professor who was used to use no logo, and he was saying that it's a bit of an easy argument, like it's facile. He said, I was like, well, you got to remember
that doesn't make it bad.
No, it doesn't make it bad. It's like it's too easy to say that it's because unbridled capital brand equals unbridled capitalism equals bad. A bit too easy. Now, I think there's a lot more to the book than that, but there's also the book has to be taken as such. Well, one, I was reminded thinking about that. I was like, wait a second, this book was written by a 25-year-old.
Yes.
So she started working on it at 25 and published it when she was 29, and it was a worldwide huge bestseller book because I had no idea she was that young. Yeah, she was young when she published the book. So
That
I'm like,
book blew
I
my
could not do that.
mind.
I could not do that at the age of 25. So saying that their arguments are a little bit easy, they're 25.
So she's
And
only about
it's
like,
meant to be so her background is in journalism, so it's a journalistic
yeah,
proposal theory in the first place.
yeah. But
And
storytelling, she knows how to communicate a story.
I think that in the context of the course, which is all about the connection between brand culture, the book is still
Perfect.
enormously
Yes.
valuable. And to make sure that I'm not just one-siding this, I also added to the syllabus the counterpoints from the economists who are saying, well, no, this is not true. And the rebuttals from Nike saying that they were misrepresented in the book, because we're going to focus a bit on Nike. And also ask them to watch Air.
Yeah.
Because I think it's super valuable to see how it's dramatized and how the belief in Michael Jordan from the mother becomes a myth. That you believe in your son so much, you manage to negotiate a deal that nobody's ever done.
And again, it was another film that was just an ad.
Yeah, completely. So we're going to no logo, and then we're going to, and we still have other articles and scholarly peer-reviewed stuff. So just to mix it and match it with how the practitioners of advertising and marketing science, how do you measure what people think of brands? Which is there's a bunch of articles on that. There is we're looking at brand archetypes that come from the theories of C.G. Jung, Carl Jung.
Yep.
Which is super interesting because Carl Jung was considered to have gone into mystical weirdness. So his theories are really, which is funny, is that they're still very alive, well, and kicking.
They are
in the spiritual self/healing, self-help world, and the advertising and marketing world.
Yeah, it's very true.
So we're going to talk about the 12 archetypes, brand archetypes. We're going to talk about another system that was theorized by a very used person who is very referenced in scholarly articles that I just figured out. Her attempt to try to systematize brand personalities with like a grid and everything.
Yeah, of course.
And it's interesting, but I think it doesn't really work. And then I found a really interesting article from another researcher I know, who compared the use of the academic way to calculate personalities versus the professionals who use a free word association. So rather than fitting what people think of a brand in boxes that are set with a system, it's just like free asking people, like, what do you think of this brand? What words come to mind? And actually,
that's interesting. That's really interesting. My mind is still blown by the fact Naomi Klein was so young when she wrote that book. So I thought she was a little bit. So she's not that much older than us.
Nope.
That is scary.
I mean, I was a lot. How old was I? Yeah, she's not much older than us.
I was in my early 20s when I read that book, and that was close to when it came out. It was late 90s.
It was 1999 when it came out.
Yeah, so I read it around that. Oh my gosh.
I read it much later.
Yeah, you read it. Oh my god.
And it's funny because the professor I mentioned it and I had it on the table. That's why we were talking about it. But he thinks it's funny that it's become the most widely quoted book for marketers, and that it was quoted as a business marketing book. But it's not. It's not a business book at all.
It's a massive.
But it does talk about business.
Yeah.
Then we're going to talk about we're going to read. That's the only full book I'm requiring them to read. This one, The Anatomy of Humbug, which is really good. It's a history of the way that the advertising industry thinks and talks of itself.
Okay.
Because I'm also thinking that one, it's a really, really good book, and it covers a lot of things, including where IDA comes from. Attention, attention, desire,
attention, action. Interest, desire, action.
Yes, all that stuff was made up completely.
Oh, completely. Yes.
Yeah. So these things that are used both by professionals as well as academics and taught to students, I think it's interesting because it's where we're deriving the professionals and researchers, academics and professionals of advertising and marketing have a way to believe in what brands do and why and how. So it's very much looking at another level of how those things are constituted within culture and what is their history. So, and it's very
That's
easy
interesting.
and it's really it's well done. I like it
Because
a lot.
Ada is in one of the syllabuses I teach. The same
So
model.
actually knowing where Ada comes from is super interesting, because we keep it's being taught as like this is a thing.
It is.
And but when you look at the history, you're like, well, actually, this is somebody just made it up one day to sell stuff.
Yeah.
It has no research theory value whatsoever from an academic perspective.
I think there are a lot of theories like that. They just become accepted, which is what mythologizing.
Yeah.
Mythologizing. And it becomes the truth. Myths, our desperate need to find meaning, and
which is also interesting in contrast with the idea of feeling a bit of imposter syndrome in the academic environment.
Yes.
But also looking into it and going, well, wait a minute. This article that is quoted like by hundreds and hundreds of other researchers and Google Scholar is actually based on asking 20 students in the 1990s. And while it's very interesting, I have doubts as to its veracity.
So much psychological research is like that.
Yeah, we asked 50 students, and you're like, wait a minute. There's everything we know about psychology is based on asking a few undergrad students.
They talk about weird in psychological research, white, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. And that informs, and then of course the psychologists themselves are all like self-referencing, self-reinforcing academics that are there to pursue their own ends, much like every single self-interested individual on the planet.
And then we're going to read some of Thinking Fast and Slow. We're going to talk about System 1, System 2, cognitive psychology.
Wow.
And for this week, I've asked them to watch, and I've just rewatched Helvetica, the documentary. Have you seen it?
No, I know I haven't seen it. So many people are talking about it. I need to watch it.
It's really, really, really good. It holds up, and it's so good to look at this just after looking at semiotics, analysis of language.
Yeah,
and to look at something that is everywhere, font-wise, informing a lot of the meaning around, and it's something you don't think about, that font and spelling has really a way of influencing the meaning of everything around us.
I'm gonna kind of round it off.
Please. It's already a lot later than we're supposed to.
But this whole thing about meaning and fonts, and it's so interesting, and your interest and passion comes across really clearly, and that's going to make a difference for the pupils and students for sure. But the thing about Helvetica and fonts is that I got an email from a colleague with a document attached. It was a spreadsheet actually, and the font was Comic Sans, and I had a visceral reaction to wanting to read it, and I'm like, I noticed I just felt it was not quite disgust, but it was almost from a font. So I don't think I could ever use that font ever on anything ever, and it's how strongly I feel about it. It's a font. So there's so much around us that we take for granted and we create meaning from, but you're onto something, and I'm glad you've got the way forward sorted. So I look forward to hearing about it as we go through. And everyone experiences imposter syndrome, and sometimes it's true.
Oh yeah, sure.